Thank you, Acting Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise and make my contribution to the address in reply to the Governor's speech. And Acting Speaker, we're all well aware that the address by the Governor is provided, the content of it is provided largely by the government of the day, and whilst I might be quite critical in some of my elements of the Governor's speech, it's certainly not directed at the Governor. I want to start off by saying I have huge concerns over the lack of content in relation to the regional spend that was contained in that address. There was no commitment to spend equitably in country areas. Now, rural areas make up 25% of our Victorian population, and country Victoria more than kicks the tin when it comes to contributing to the Victorian economy more largely. But we don't get anywhere near 25% of this government's infrastructure fund. And what we'd certainly like to see, and we have an upcoming budget, is some commitment for 25% of that infrastructure spend, commensurate with the 25% of Victoria's population coming from the country, being matched within the budget papers, so that we're making sure we get our fair share of investment in areas of rural and regional Victoria. I also want to raise the issue of housing affordability and homelessness, which was fleetingly covered in the Governor's speech, but it continues to be a massive problem, not only in my electorate of Gippsland East, but right across the state. And my concern is that we really have no short-term solutions being proposed. Now, what I'm asking the government to do, and I note the Minister is here at the table now, is to release a detailed plan of what it intends to do to address this problem short term. Whenever housing is raised in this place, the response is always coming back from the government of the day with reference to what it phrases as the big build. But the reality of it is, when we look at the outcomes of what the big build will deliver, and the big build, and that investment had support from across the chamber, but it will deliver 12,000 homes. That's what it will do. That significant investment will deliver 12,000 homes. But we already have a waiting list that's nearly 70,000 and climbing, and at least half of that is on the priority housing waiting list. So over the next few years, we're going to build 12,000 homes when the waiting list sits at 70,000. So the question is, what is the government and what is the parliament, I guess, more broadly going to do about that? Is it more, do we do more around rental assistance? Is it more short-term accommodation that we provide to those in crisis? Is it more of a focus on providing more affordable housing so that people who are currently sleeping in their cars or sleeping tough but do have an income can finally afford housing? But we need to have a plan of what we're going to do in the short term. We can't just continually keep referring to the big build, because the big build does not provide a short-term answer. Now, I think one of the issues that we can have a look at immediately is providing more support to those charity groups that are assisting our homeless in our communities. They are doing some great work, but they are up against it, I guess, with financial restrictions of what they can contribute. So, to my line of thinking, we don't have a short-term solution to this problem. We need one. And whatever that be, maybe even we can get together as a parliament and have a look at how we can address this burgeoning problem in our communities at the moment. And it's only going to be made worse, and I'm sure the Minister is aware of this, as we progress through this year, because we've got rising interest rates and the Reserve Bank forecasting that they're going to increase. And when I read those stories on the front pages of the paper, on the news bulletins at night, what does that mean on the ground? Well, rising interest rates means more people doing it tough, unable to keep up their mortgage repayments, sleeping rough, sleeping in their cars. We really should work as a parliament on providing some short-term solutions to those problems. I want to talk for a few moments about roads, Acting Speaker. The speech from the Governor said that this government has spent the last 4 years building the roads we need. That is not accurate. Not in country Victoria is that accurate. The roads are a disgrace. Truckies, bus drivers, long-term residents say they're the worst they've ever seen. To infer that we are building the roads that we need is not accurate. Now, even before the rain events that we had in the last couple of years, the roads were falling to bits and we're in a horrible situation. The rain has made it worse, but we cannot blame the rain. I actually feel sorry for the staff at Regional Roads Victoria. They would just be getting absolutely hammered because of the condition of our rural roads. You cannot cut roads maintenance funding in your budget, and it's there in black and white in the government's own budget, and expect any other result than the road conditions deteriorating. So we have another budget coming up, as I mentioned earlier, and we need to see more investment in roads maintenance, not another cut. The Governor also said that this government will improve hospitals and our health service. Well, I would certainly like to think that they would. I mean, it's hard to imagine our health system getting any worse than it is now. It has to improve. We have health workers leaving the system because of the stresses and the pressures of the job. And what happens is when they leave, obviously that workload burden rests on fewer. So when we have our nurses under pressure, under stress, realising that they can get out and get similar dollars in another sector, they're doing that. And it leaves that health workload resting on more and more people. And again, that then results in greater levels of stress and a greater downturn in service. We have also a number of rural and regional hospitals that need upgrading. The Bairnsdale Hospital, which we committed pre-election to rebuild to the tune of $230 million for stage 1, the plans are done and it is sitting there ready to go, and I would certainly ask the government, urge the government to consider that project as one of priority for my electorate in East Gippsland and the people of East Gippsland, to give them the health service that they need. I attended, Acting Speaker, on the weekend the Hayfield Timber Festival, and what a great event that was. And it made me reflect yet again on this government's lack of support for our hardwood timber industry. The government talks about transitioning to hardwood plantations by 2030, but those hardwood plantations, if we're to transition by 2030, they should be 25 years old now, those plantations. The trouble is, these plantations do not exist, so therefore there is nothing to transition to when it comes to hardwood plantation. As I've said in this chamber so many times before, our timber industry harvests 5% of our bush on an 80-year rotation, 0.04% a year. Yet we're told that we're going to get out of that, but we're not told where that replacement timber is coming from. It's interesting, I was reading, and this is how bored I was over Christmas, Acting Speaker, but I was reading the report of the International Panel on Climate Change, and it was interesting to see their very common and often repeated ethos about saying timber is the only carbon storing building material, and the fact that we should be using timber as the preferred building material to address greenhouse emissions and global warming. So if that's the case, why in Victoria are we closing down our timber industry? Planet Ark similarly said they have a slogan at the moment, do the world some good, build it with wood. Now, we should be taking a leaf out of their book and making sure we support our native timber industry. If we do get rid of our timber industry, it's obviously not just that. It's not a case of if we have fires again, it's when. And our timber industry provides the frontline first defence in relation to fires. And if we get rid of them, we are going to be more vulnerable in our rural areas to the attack of wildfire. Our workers in the timber industry are presently facing enormous uncertainty due to court action, but we need this government to be very proactive about getting them back into the bush. I want to take a few minutes to also talk about our bushfire rebuilds. How slow have they been? These fires hit East Gippsland in 2019-20. The Cape Conran boardwalk that was meant to be finished 2 years ago is not finished. The Cape Conran cabins that were meant to be finished 2 years ago are not finished. And the Thurrow River Bridge, we haven't had a sod turned on that in 3 years. And the latest departmental advice is that that bridge won't be rebuilt till 2025, 5 years after the fires. That is an absolute disgrace. It should not take 5 years to build a bridge to our second biggest campground that we have in our region. Of concern was when this was raised in last year's PAYAC hearings, The departmental secretary sat back and said, yeah, this is a priority project for us, we're across it, we understand everything, and then spoke about this bridge to an island. There is no island, it's a bridge over a river on the Victorian mainland. It doesn't go to an island, but he was apparently right across this and it was a priority project, but then spoke about a bridge to an island. It makes you wonder, I tell you. I mentioned bushfire preparedness before. We have this ongoing problem in East Gippsland where post-fires we've allowed roadside vegetation to build up to incredible levels. We have black wattle infestation. It's like a jungle on some of our roadsides. We also have these windrows of logs and timber that were pushed up after the fires that haven't been cleared yet. All this time, 3 years after the fires, and they haven't been cleared. I'm told that they will be cleared by the middle of this year, but I'll believe that when it actually happens. But in addition to that, we also need to make sure that we're controlling vegetation more broadly on our roadsides. There are so many impediments to getting these approvals through to maintain vegetation on our roadsides. We saw in the 2019-20 fires they acted as wicks, and we don't want that to be the case again when we have fire in the landscape, and it will be when, as I said, not if. I want to talk about access to mental health, Acting Speaker. We have significant problems with access to the mental health services in East Gippsland that people need. They present in crisis. Had one instance very recently where a person in crisis and their family presented to the Bairnsdale Hospital. They were referred to Flynn Ward in the Latrobe Valley. So the family contacted Flynn Ward in the Latrobe Valley and they were told that they had at least a 3-week wait before there was going to be a bed available. So this person who is threatening harm to others, is having suicidal tendencies, fronts up to our mental health facility in East Gippsland and he's told you've got at least a 3-week wait. Now, the family is then expected to provide ongoing 24-hour care to this person to make sure that, that a horrible outcome does not occur. We need more investment in our mental health services and we need to see results on the ground. The government talks a big game when it comes to mental health services, but a lot of us aren't seeing it at ground level. Through our electorate offices, we're seeing the situations continually get worse and worse and worse. And I'm seeing this in my office, and I know a lot of my National Party colleagues are, where people who need help are getting told there's a waiting list for beds and it is not good enough. We need to do better. On the public dental system in my area, the wait list is over 2 years. We have no public dentist in Bairnsdale, and in cases of very, very urgent care, people rock up and they get told they've got a more than 2-year waiting list, but in some cases they're given a voucher to present to a private dental practice. We had one instance recently where the person got the voucher, presented it at the private dental practice, but they don't accept the government vouchers. So there's no requirement for the private dentists to accept the government vouchers. The person then got in pain, had to make a decision, paid out of pocket, and he's now right behind the 8 ball. We need to make sure that if we're going to hand out these vouchers, that the information is provided to people as to there and then as to the dental practices that will use these vouchers, accept these vouchers and allow the work to be done. But it is a mess and we need to provide more services under the public dental banner to areas right across rural and regional Victoria, but also in my electorate. I also want to briefly touch on V-line and transport, Acting Speaker. In relation to our V-line service in Bairnsdale, there are some elements of it that have improved with the velocity carriages, but there are other elements of it that have got worse. In the 1970s, you could get on the train in Bairnsdale to go to Melbourne and get a meal, go to the buffet car, get a coffee, you could get a drink of water, you could do anything. Now here we are in 2023, and you get on the train for that 3.25 hour trip or whatever it is, and you cannot get anything to eat on that train. We have a lot of elderly people living in our electorate. You cannot get anything to eat, anything to drink. The buffet service has gone. I believe that there's been one provided on the Albury line. That should be standard practice with all long-haul V-line services in Victoria, and the government ought to make that a priority and make sure that is delivered. It is very important. There's a lot of work for this government to do, and I look forward to seeing it done.